It's a balmy Saturday afternoon. A heavyset 78-year-old man walks into the general store. No stranger to this place. It's his lifeline for morning essentials: Diet Cola, a dollar scratcher, and a bacon, egg, and cheese biscuit with a touch of mayo. He hobbles to the counter with a limp 20 years in the making. It gets worse when it rains. Reaching into his pocket, he pulls out a wad of crumpled dollar bills and exactly 37 cents. With burly hands tough enough to pull tobacco, but tender enough to rock 6 grandkids to sleep, the man reaches over and hands his due to the petite cashier behind the register. She goes to the local high school, and on the weekends she helps run her parents' general store. She studies in short bursts between handling customer transactions. "University is your ticket out of here," her English teacher told her, so she works hard to make it count. Her English teacher is the man's daughter, one of them. He has 5. The cashier has known the man since she was old enough to have memories. Old Man Jim, a farmer with 80 acres down the road, stopped in every morning for the past 20 years to get his bacon biscuit, soda, and scratchers like clockwork. Old Man Jim maintained a precise routine. He drove into town 50 miles away on Mondays to stock up, went to church on Sundays, and tended his crops on weekdays in between. But every morning, he went to the country store. "Hey, young lady, how's life treating you today?" he asked the cashier. "Same as it always is, I guess. How are you?" "Better than blessed." "Have a good one, young lady," he responded cheerfully. "Thanks. See you tomorrow," the cashier responded, fully intending to see him again tomorrow morning. Old Man Jim started his truck, took a bite of his biscuit, and headed down the dirt road to his tobacco crops. He turned into the driveway, killed the engine, and sat back to savor 2 more bites of his bacon biscuit. He looked out the window, watching a brown thrasher quarrel with a sparrow over something trivial, probably a nightcrawler. He grinned as he watched the altercation. It reminded him of the twins, his grandkids, fighting over a toy from Christmas past. He finished the sandwich, took a swig of the Diet Cola, and shut the truck door. He grabbed his shovel from the truck bed. It was mainly to threaten rat snakes that snuck up on him from time to time, and walked towards the crops. 58 minutes later, he was dead. I'm Leslie, a CVICU nurse and urban planner at heart, and this is the Vaso and Vibes podcast. From the underbelly of critical care nursing, dark stories with a beautiful twist, brilliantly absurd, shockingly effective. While most of you listening are in the healthcare space, there are others unfamiliar with many of the terms I use in this podcast. So let's get into it. Vaso is an abbreviation for vasopressin, which is a drug we use in the ICU to help get a patient's blood pressure up when it's dangerously low. It's a coded term familiar to those in critical care environments. ICU stands for Intensive Care Unit. What Old Man Jim likely experienced was cardiac arrest caused by cardiovascular disease, obesity, and other factors, many of which were out of his control. Cardiac arrest is when the heart stops beating, blood ceases to flow, and tissues stop getting oxygen. Cardiac arrest is a medical emergency. Nearly 90% of cardiac arrests that happen out of the hospital are deadly, and only about 9% of adults experiencing out-of-hospital cardiac arrest who actually receive timely emergency medical care and make it to the hospital survive to discharge. For rural areas like Old Man Jim's town, the statistics are much worse. To help you wrap your mind around just how deadly medical deserts can be, let's examine an experience from Old Man Jim's past. 20 years before Jim drew his last breath in that tobacco field, his wife woke up at 4 a.m. to braid her hair and make the biscuits. Hazel, Old Man Jim's wife, was a lunch lady at Baileyville Elementary. She was short and stout, like a tea kettle, and just as loud and steamy. Every weekday morning, she awoke at 4 a.m. to get dressed and French braid her hair into a bun updo, secured tightly with a paisley printed duckbill clip to keep it all tucked in. She would hobble to the kitchen, gather all of her ingredients, and get to work making buttermilk biscuits and frying bacon for her and Old Man Jim. He would awaken to the sweet smell of maple bacon dancing in the cast iron skillet. They would eat their breakfast, sopping up every bit of the currant jelly and the moment together, a silent, sacred meditation in each other's presence. After breakfast, she would sit on their back deck and enjoy a Virginia Slim cigarette while watching the birds quarrel over the near-empty bird feeder. Those brown thrashers were always picking fights. Just like the twins, she thought. She extinguished her cigarette butt on the ceramic ashtray baby Judy, her daughter, made for her one day in high school art class. It was pink, with yellow morning glories and the words, "I love you, Mama," painted in the equivalent of hand-scripted Comic Sans. But baby Judy wasn't a baby anymore. She was now grown with 2 kids of her own. The ashtray, the only remnant of a creative childhood streak tainted by the realities of life in rural poverty. Hazel grabbed her apron, drove to work, and milked biscuits for the entire Baileyville elementary student body. This was Hazel's routine for most of her adult life. One chilly autumn morning, Hazel woke up, made the biscuits and bacon, and sat down with Old Man Jim for their morning ritual. When they were done, she got up, cleared the table, grabbed her cardigan from the coat rack, her Virginia Slims, and stepped onto the back deck. It was her me time, self-care before the day's chaos begins. "Chilly out," she mumbled, a cigarette pursed between 2 lips, bopping with each syllable. She lit the cigarette and sat down with her coffee mug to watch the brown thrashers quarrel. An hour later, and now dressed in his farming overalls, Old Man Jim walks to the front door and grabs his truck keys. He looks out the picture window and notices Hazel's blue Toyota Corolla still parked in the driveway. He thought. Must be having car trouble. But in his gut, he knew something wasn't right. The sun was shining eerily bright, too bright, for such a deceptively cold day. He looks out onto the back porch window and sees a ray of sunlight washing out Hazel's French braid bun. At this angle, he can only see her head. Probably dropped a cigarette, he thought. He didn't really believe that. "Hazel," he yells out. "Hey, darling, you got car trouble?" No response. He walks through the kitchen, picking up speed as he passes the china closet and barrels to the back door. He steps onto the back porch and forces himself through the storm door and onto the deck. Hazel is still slumped over, coffee cup spilled all over her lap, her cigarette butt still smoldering, smoke rising over the words, "I love you," in the ceramic ashtray. A haunting chill comes over Old Man Jim. He lifts his clubby, weathered hands and gently strokes Hazel's cheek with an ironic tenderness. A true Beauty and the Beast moment, Southern Living edition. "Hazel, don't leave me, Hazel. Hazel!" He slides his hand to her neck, checking for a pulse, but doesn't know exactly what he's checking for. "Hazel! Lord, thy will be done." Hazel died old and gray, which isn't saying much for the South. The county coroner ruled the cause of death to be sudden cardiac death, resulting from cessation of cerebral blood flow and global tissue hypoxia. Her heart stopped due to a complete blockage in the left anterior descending artery. Blood and oxygen weren't flowing to her heart, so eventually blood stopped flowing through her heart to her brain and the rest of her body. So what causes this? Let's examine Hazel's life. Studies of rural-urban disparities have consistently found that in cases of ischemic heart disease, rural patients tend to be older, female, white, and smokers. Hazel lived a life in poverty, but beautiful in its simplicity. Each day was beautiful, lived in dutiful devotion to her spouse, her work, and in that moment of solitude with a cigarette and coffee on her porch, to herself. And she lived out that simple, beautiful life each day until it killed her. Chronic smoking is a risk factor for sudden cardiac death. Hazel was a chronic smoker. Obesity is a risk factor for sudden cardiac death. Hazel was obese. A diet high in animal fat is a risk factor for sudden cardiac death. Hazel ate buttermilk biscuits and bacon every day of her adult life, and that was only for breakfast. Nothing could have been done differently in that moment to save Hazel's life. But if something could be done, let's think hypothetical for a moment. What would that something be, and what would be the outcome? Let's play the tape all the way to the end. Hazel is sitting on her porch, smoking her cigarette. Suddenly, the jaw pain she's been feeling for days now is worse, and there's a severe pain in her chest. An elephant sitting on her bosom level of pain. Now, let's say old man Jim is sitting on the deck with her. Now, he doesn't smoke, but he does love a hot cup of Sanka and a good bird fight. Let's say he's sitting on the deck, sees her body jerk and double over and her grabbing her chest. Let's say he's good and well-versed on emergency medical response and instantly runs over, taps her shoulders, asks if she's okay, then yells for someone to call 911. But someone isn't there. No one is there to call. So he calls 911, drags her heavy body from the deck chair to the hard deck floor surface. The dispatcher says it will take 21 minutes for a volunteer rescue squad to arrive and tells old man Jim, "Stay with me." He guides the desperate husband through cardiopulmonary resuscitation, or CPR. Let's say old man Jim achieves what's called ROSC, or return of spontaneous circulation. ROSC means that Hazel now has a palpable pulse, and old man Jim actually knows what that feels like and is getting circulation through her body. Now, Hazel is suddenly breathing, coughing. The next biggest hurdle? How long will that ROSC sustain? But this is a hypothetical thought experiment, so let's assume Hazel sustains ROSC for the now 15 minutes it takes for the ambulance to arrive. So the ambulance arrives, Hazel's loaded onto the stretcher, and the EMTs, emergency medical technicians, and paramedic do everything possible to keep Hazel alive for the 50-minute drive to the closest hospital, which is not even a level 1 trauma center. It is the rural hospital in the closest town to Hazel and old man Jim. It is where he drives every Monday to get groceries for the week. It is scheduled to close in 6 months, and here's why. Over 180 rural hospitals have shuttered their doors since 2005. Hundreds more are at risk. Hospitals cost a lot of money to run, and they depend on large patient volumes and reimbursement from insurance companies to cover those costs. With the average small town rural household making approximately $61,000 to $66,000 per year, and with a low density population served, rural hospitals struggle to bring in enough money from out-of-pocket payments to cover their bills. What's more, Medicare and Medicaid services, on which a large chunk of the aggregate in Old Man Jim's community depend on, reimbursed based on structures that end up disenfranchising the vulnerable populations they're intended to help. Rural hospitals provide vital emergency, inpatient, and outpatient care, and here's why that matters. Rural residents are at the highest risk of suffering poor health outcomes due to hospital closures because these hospitals are often the only point of access for emergency care. These are only part of the systemic barriers that marginalize people in rural spaces and why the intersections of nursing and planning are so critical to improving critical care. But back to Hazel. The hospital does have a cath lab, though, and that's a very, very good thing for Hazel. When the ambulance arrives at the hospital, it's go time. Nursing staff get Hazel transferred onto a bed, start the electrocardiogram testing, and administer morphine. Blood is drawn for labs. She's given oxygen and wheeled off to the cath lab. Nitroglycerin and aspirin were taken care of on the ambulance ride over. Old man Jim, who was there for the ride, learns Mona doesn't mean Mona Lisa. A tube is inserted into Hazel's leg and fed to her heart. Dye is injected. The blockage is found. From here, things can go one of two ways. The provider inflates a balloon to open the artery and places a stent, or emergency cabbage surgery follows. If stenting fails, or if multi-vessel disease is found, cabbage is the plan. Cabbage, or coronary artery bypass graft, requires providers remove part of a blood vessel, usually the great saphenous vein in the leg, and use it to reroute blood around the blockage, restoring coronary circulation. This allows the heart to keep getting oxygen so that it can keep supplying oxygen to the body. After the cath lab, the patient goes to the intensive care unit. If at a larger hospital with multiple specialty ICUs, the patient goes to a cardiac ICU. For the first day or so, the patient is closely observed for further cardiovascular pathology. After the ICU, the patient goes to the step-down unit and, if stable, is then eventually discharged to cardiac rehabilitation. While this is only a general overview presented through a hypothetical lens, it helps to understand the bigger picture of what happens after the heart attack and why. Know that patients experience fear, apprehension, and pain, though well managed, the entire time. Nurses treat their patients while they navigate the disease process, making their journey as comfortable as possible. Nurses are there with the patient by their side. Providers come and go. Techs run tests and leave. Visitors drop in and out, but nurses are by their side through it all. Old man Jim was not so lucky. There were no rescue squads or cath labs in his tobacco field. No morphine, no nitro. Now that we know what happened to Old Man Jim, let's examine why it happened. If cardiac arrest is the what, isolation is the why. There are factors that explain why some people are more likely to die sooner or later than others, and from specific disease processes. Zip code is the largest predictor. A zip code can tell us a lot about where you live, what resources are near you, like grocery stores and hospitals, and even close estimations to how much money you make. Zip codes are so powerful, they are essentially a 7-digit crystal ball, fortune-telling our possible fates. Old Man Jim lived in geographic isolation, away from advanced medical care. He was 50 miles from the closest urban area. As he lay there dying in his tobacco field, he stood very little chance. Old Man Jim depended on sausage biscuits and diet sodas as his dietary staple, only going to town one day a week to buy groceries. Rural communities are often food deserts, or places with limited access to affordable, fresh, and nutritious whole foods. Poor nutrition meant old man Jim lacked the variety and sustenance in his diet to maintain cardiovascular health, and over time, this restricted diet of processed foods likely contributed to a hardening of his arteries, arteriosclerosis, and a buildup of plaque within them, atherosclerosis. Though he had a large family, Jim was alone when he died, a common phenomenon for older adults. As of 2019, it was estimated that around 32% of persons aged 65 and older live alone. Socioculturally, Western populations place value on independence and self-reliance, often living in single-occupant living arrangements as opposed to the communal dwelling norms of Eastern European, African, and Asian populations. Social isolation contributed to Jim's death simply because no one was around to help him when he died. Every day, people living in rural spaces wake up and drive to work, show up for varsity football practice, or go to church services, navigating their built environments as best they know how. And like old man Jim, many of them fully expect to show up tomorrow, but some of them will never make it. Systems establish borders that create marginalization, foster isolation, disrupt interpersonal connections that could otherwise be life-saving, and shift perspectives, making people think this is all very normal and just the way it is. Thus, a culture is formed around morbidity and mortality, leaving many rural folk to believe it's just God's will or the way things are. That afternoon, old man Jim never came home. He wasn't there to meet the twins when they got off the bus. The bus driver rang the school, who rang old man Jim's daughter, the teacher, who raced to get her kids from the bus stop. Randy, the bus driver, is a good man, patient and kind. He waited there with the boys until old man Jim's daughter got to the bus stop. She dropped the boys off at the house and followed the winding dirt road past the country store and through the gate at the tobacco field. Immediately, she found his body lying peacefully atop a bushy entanglement of thigh-high tobacco leaves. Hazel awoken and donned her housecoat. She brushed through her long but thinning gray hair, the split ends giving her locks their own gnarly curl pattern at the tips. She let it hang. There would be no buttermilk biscuits and bacon. No sacred silence and sopping of currant jelly. The sympathy calls and random drop-bys were getting fewer and farther between. It's been 20 years since old man Jim passed. She was alone. The isolation has been maddening. She grabbed her cardigan from the coat rack, her Virginia Slims, and coffee mug, and waddled through the kitchen and out onto the deck. "Chilly out," she said, the cigarette dangling from her lips. She sat down, looked up, and smiled into the sun, the golden rays saturating her soul. God's will be done. She sat back in the deck chair and took one last drag from the cigarette. There were no brown thrashers today. While there is an element of beauty to old man Jim dying doing the thing he loved most, tending to his land after eating his favorite meal, it raises the question, what does a good death look like? If he had access to life-saving interventions, would he have wanted it any other way? In the next episode, we'll examine that question. Join me next time. This episode was researched and written by Leslie O'Hirkian for the Vaso and Vibes podcast. Sources for each episode are at vasoandvibes.com. Thank you for listening.